I still have the printout. 9 transmission lines, a column of timestamps, and a frequency tag that reads Wraith line in the far right margin. The first entry is 14/7/43, the last 18/24/51. 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 9 fire missions, all one voice, calling grids on a radio she had been formally removed from 6 hours before the operation began. I keep it folded inside my logbook, not for sentiment. For the same reason a navigator keeps a chart that corrected him. Because the error was mine as much as anyone's, and because I was 22 years old in that command post, and I believed what I was told. General Voss told us she was a frequency technician. He said it at the pre-operation brief in a tent that smelled of diesel and chalk dust. We were 48 hours from the corridor push, and the general was walking the fire's net assignment with his S6 and 2 senior radio operators, of which she was not, officially, one. She was attached to our element as a comm support specialist, and that was the designation on her paperwork. Her actual qualification folder was somewhere in a rear transfer packet that had not caught up to her yet. General Voss did not know what was in it. He looked at her standing in the left rear corner of the tent, and he said, in front of 11 people, that forward fires coordination was a combat role, and that frequency management, while critical, was technician's work. She did not argue. She said, "Understood, sir." And she wrote something in her field notebook, and she sat down in the corner where she had been standing. I was young enough to find that reasonable. The general was not a small man in that tent, not physically, not professionally. He had run joint operations for 11 years. He knew fires nets, and she was quiet, and she was junior, and her paperwork said comm support. So I wrote my own log entry, and I moved on. What I did not notice, because I was 22, and because I was focused on my own frequency assignments, was what she did for the next 6 hours. She stayed in that tent. She did not leave for the chow line at 1700. She did not leave when the S6 dismissed the support staff. She sat at the secondary table with a radio handset and a yellow legal pad, and she worked through every alternate frequency in the fires net. Not the assigned ones, not the ones in the plan, but the backups that existed on paper and had never been tested in this theater. I know this because I found the legal pad later. She had run interference checks on 18 channels. She had noted which 3 had clean paths given the terrain and the likely enemy jamming frequencies we'd been briefed on. She had pre-programmed those 3 into the backup handset at the secondary table and written the channel numbers on a strip of green tape she stuck to the side of the radio. She also wrote out the full grid sequence for every forward observer's position in the corridor, the current positions and 2 fallback positions each, by hand, on a second sheet of the legal pad, indexed by element. The primary fires plan had that information spread across 3 separate overlays. She put it on one page. I found that sheet too, and I stared at it for a long time, because what she had built was not a backup for the radio. It was a backup for the plan. A single-page fires reference that an operator under contact could read and use without looking up. The kind of thing that takes 2 hours to build right, and that no one thinks to build until after the moment they needed it. Nobody asked her to do that. It was not her assignment. The assigned fires coordinator, Sergeant First Class Brennan, 12 years in, solid operator, was working the primary net and the primary net only, the way the plan said to. I did not understand what she had built until hour 2, when Brennan went down. He was not killed. He took fragmentation through the vehicle door at the primary relay position, and the medic had him stabilized in under 4 minutes, but he was off the net, and the primary handset had taken a round through the housing and was not coming back. The corridor was 2 kilometers of contested road, and both companies in the breach needed fires coordination to hold the flanks. Without the net, the corridor would close in approximately 20 minutes. That was not my estimate. That was the fires officer's estimate, stated out loud in the command post at 1403. I was at the secondary table. I had a working radio. I had my frequency assignments, and I was about to key up and try to reach the alternate relay point through the assigned channel, which I knew had been showing intermittent jamming since 1330. She was faster. She did not run. She walked. The way she had walked into the pre-op brief, the way she had taken the general's reassignment without a word, and she sat down at the secondary table beside me, and she put on the headset, and she keyed the handset with the green tape on the side, the one with the 3 clean channels she had tested and pre-programmed the night before. She got an answer on the first try. I sat there, and I watched her run a fires net for 4 hours and 17 minutes under intermittent contact. And I want to be precise about what that looked like because she ran the fires net does not carry the weight of what she actually did. It looked like this. She had a grid reference map folded to the corridor sector, and she kept it flat on the table with her left forearm, while she wrote with her right hand. She never raised her voice. When the channel took interference, twice in the first hour, 3 times in the third, she clicked to the next clean channel on the handset, announced the switch in a single clipped sentence, and was transmitting again before I had processed that she had moved at all. She did not repeat herself to the forward elements. She spoke once, clearly, and they answered, or she waited 4 seconds and spoke again. She never spoke a third time to the same element. She didn't have to. At 15:44, she called a correction on a fire mission. That would have dropped short of the target by 40 meters, because the forward observer had given her a grid from a position that had shifted since the last map update. She knew the terrain had shifted because she had looked at the aerial imagery during the pre-op brief, and she had noticed a discrepancy in the grid overlay that no one else in that tent had flagged. She had written it in her field notebook. She used that note at 15:44 to correct a fires call under pressure. Without explaining to anyone why she was correcting it, she just corrected it, sent the adjusted grid, and moved to the next call. At 16:31, she identified a secondary enemy position that was not on the corridor map. She identified it because she heard a pattern in the suppression fire that was inconsistent with the known positions, a timing gap that indicated something firing from a fixed point further northwest than the charted line. She called it to the fires officer on the command post net, gave him a 6-digit grid, told him the timing interval was approximately 45 seconds, and that the position had been firing since at least 14:50. She was right on all 3 counts. The subsequent adjustment neutralized the position at 16:41. 41 minutes of suppression fire from a position no one had on the map, and she had clocked it by ear while running 8 other transmissions. The corridor held. Both companies completed extraction by 18:19. The last fire mission closed at 18:24. She logged the final transmission at 18:24:51. I know the exact second because I was watching her write it. And then she took off the headset and set the handset down and folded her map and stood up from the table. She said nothing to me. She picked up her field notebook and she walked out of the command post into the late daylight, and I watched her go, and I did not say anything either, because I was 22 and I did not yet understand what I had just watched. General Voss understood it 40 minutes later. The after-action review began at 1900 in the same tent where he had told her, in front of 11 people, that forward fires coordination was not her role. The fires officer walked the net sequence, how the primary went down, how the secondary was activated, how the corridor held, and he put the fires log on the table. General Voss picked it up. He was the kind of man who read logs the way other men read orders, which is to say completely, line by line, without rushing. He got through the first 4 transmission entries without changing expression. He stopped at the 5th. I was at the rear of the tent. I saw his hand stop moving down the page. He looked at the frequency tag in the margin, Wraith line, and he looked at it for a moment longer than the others, and then he turned 2 pages back to the top of the log to check the name logged at the secondary table. He found it. He turned back to the 5th entry. He continued down the page. He read through the channel switches, the grid correction at 15:44, the secondary position call at 16:31. He read the entire log. When he reached the 9th and final entry, he set the log flat on the table and put both hands on it, palms down, the way a man does when he is processing something he cannot immediately answer. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the tent canvas move in the evening wind. He looked up at the fires officer. He asked one question: "Where is she?" She was outside. Someone went to get her. She came in through the tent flap the same way she had left. Same walk, same field notebook in her left hand. And she stopped at the appropriate distance, and she looked at the general. General Voss stood up from his chair. He was the most senior officer in the theater element. He had 11 years in joint operations. He came around the table with the fires log still in his right hand, and he just stopped in front of her, and he looked at her for 2 full seconds. The kind of 2 seconds that count in a room full of people, and then he raised his right hand and he rendered a formal salute. He held it until she returned it. He said, I owe you an apology and an explanation, and the apology comes first. He said it in front of everyone in that tent. The same way he had said she was a technician, in front of everyone in that tent, 48 hours before. He told her that her qualification folder had arrived in the S1 section at 0800 that morning and that he had not yet been briefed on its contents. He told her, in front of his staff, that he had made an assignment decision without complete information, and that the corridor and the men in it were alive because she had built a backup that no one asked her to build on a net he had removed her from, and had run it without hesitation when the primary went down. He said, I will not make that error again, she said. Thank you, sir. Nothing else. I have thought about that night a great deal in the years since. I have thought about the pre-op brief, and what I wrote in my log, and the fact that I found her sitting at the secondary table. Reasonable. I have thought about the 6 hours she spent building something on a net that was not hers, because she looked at the terrain imagery and the jamming frequencies, and she understood what would happen if the primary went down, and she decided to be ready for it without being asked. I have thought about the 45-second timing interval she clocked by ear while running 8 other transmissions. I have thought about the grid correction at 1544 and the note she had already written in her field notebook, because she had noticed the discrepancy at the pre-op brief and written it down anyway, even after being told to sit in the corner. I have gone back through that sequence many times in the years since, and I have never been able to find a moment where she was not already 3 steps ahead of what the situation required. What I do now, every time I log a new frequency assignment, is write the operator's name beside the call sign, not just the call sign, the name, because the fires log from that corridor push had Wraith line in the margin for 9 entries, and it took General Voss reading it line by line before anyone in authority knew whose name went there. I decided that someone in my position should always know, from the first entry, not the last.